Good evening. I'm Apostle T.B. Walker. I want to take this time to welcome you to our Thursday night live Bible study. Certainly glad that you're here today. We've been having a really interesting study, studying the life of Moses here. Really, the life of Moses, but also how God is building Moses and preparing him and shaping him for the role that he has for him, as the great deliverer here and the lawgiver. It's got a lot of things that he's got to build on, and God's doing some things that are really in the mind of Moses inconceivable. Some things that will show us a lot about how God is working in our lives today as well. Let's take a look once again in the book of Exodus, chapter 5, verses 4 through 9. Here's what it says. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people are many in the land. He said they're numerous, and you're stopping them from working. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce their quota. They are lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Now, let's take a look at that. The king of Egypt says to Moses, to Moses and Aaron, wait a minute. Why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to work. Listen, this scene here has lots of tension. It's palpable. You could probably feel it as they're there. As Pharaoh, there's an audience that he's having with these slaves, right? He takes the meeting, and I'm sure Pharaoh is now coming to himself. There's a certain haze that they are experiencing, and maybe this is going to work out. And then it seems like Pharaoh, after hearing the requests, you could probably see even the change in the look on his face, maybe from curiosity now to absolute amazement, and even now anger. And that they're demanding, and I'm sure he looks at this as a demand, and his anger begins to simmer. And Pharaoh not only rejects the idea of giving them these days off, but he saw this request as a huge waste of time. He looks up and he says, wait a minute, you're asking me to do this? The people have stopped. They probably have stopped assuming that Moses and Aaron were going to go in and they were going to be successful. There's a day off that's being taken, and Pharaoh's now coming to himself, and he said, "Wait a minute. I'm amazed, first of all, that I even took the meeting with you guys. The king's heart is in the Lord's hand, and he turns it however he wills. And I'm sure there are people who are, have entertained people that God has sent in, and after they have left, have looked at themselves and said, why did I even give him the interview? Why did I even consider him for the job? Why did I say yes to that? But this is God opening the door that no man can open. And so when you look at this, Pharaoh now looks at this and he understands how unusual this situation is in the first place. Not only, did he take the meeting, but Pharaoh also now is looking and saying, wait a minute, how did they come in here and talk to me? What did they say to me? Who do they think they are? I mean, who do they think they're talking to? So when you're really looking at this, he's looking at the gall of them, but he's also probably looking at himself saying, why did I even listen to this stupid, ridiculous request from these slaves? Pharaoh says, look, the people in the land are many, and you're stopping them from working. Now, there have been pharaohs before them that have made huge attempts to cut the population, but they continue to multiply. And their growth was one of the things that got them in trouble in the first place. The fact that they wouldn't die. There's some things that come to people's attention simply because what was assumed to work doesn't work. And eventually, if that thing happens over and over again, it starts getting people's attention. Sometimes it's your resilience that will get people's attention. The fact that you just have stick-to-itiveness, you just won't fall. Now, you may not climb higher, you may not be faster, but the fact that you just won't quit sometimes gets the attention even of enemies. This is a good thing for Israel, but this is bad in Pharaoh's eyes. There's no way that he can even logistically think about letting all these people go. He says, do you see how many slaves there are? You understanding the kind of logistics that it would take to get them out there and get them back? This is a problem, and this started the whole thing in the first place. But Pharaoh is not thinking about this as a manager, right? He's not thinking about this as a mover. This is not about plotting, their trip. from Egypt to, to this mountain and back. No, Pharaoh is speaking here out of fear. What it probably doesn't look like that to Moses. It probably looks like Moses is about to get backslapped here. But the truth of the matter is, Moses is absolutely protected because God has already said, this is what's going to happen. No weapon formed against him shall prosper. Pharaoh was well within his ability to say, and give them 30 lashes anyway, but it couldn't happen. Not only didn't it happen, but it couldn't happen because they were under God's protection. And, I'm sure it doesn't look like it right here. And in the face of an angry Pharaoh, they can't see that Pharaoh is in fear. Fear is manifesting. He has the same eyes that the old pharaohs had when they looked on the children of Israel and saw they just keep growing. That somebody's hand is on them. Something is happening with them that they continue to grow. So Pharaoh realizes something. They can't unify. I can't let them unify. They must not know another identity. What they're identified as slaves, these Hebrew nothings, if they ever unify. Listen, what doesn't look like fear, looks like there's huge attacks and they're wanton and brazen. But the truth of the matter is, there are some spirits out there that are against you. That you look at and you don't realize that's fear. There's some people that are moving against you and you think it's anger, you think it's aggression, but it's actually fear. They're afraid of you because they see the resilience. They see the growth in it. They don't see you breaking out of Egypt, right? They don't see the people here leaving Egypt. But what they do see is that they're growing in spite of everything we're trying. They continue to multiply in the land where there are going to be more of them than us. They're going to overtake the land. Sometimes the real attack is that people can see what you can't see. They can see the attack where you think you're stagnant. They can see you growing and coming at them where you think that you're being attacked yourself. So this was something that Pharaoh said, no, they can't interrupt the productivity of this great workforce. So verse 6, Pharaoh says, so the same day, Pharaoh gives these orders to his slave drivers and is in charge of the people, those that are in charge of the people. He says, you're no longer to give them straw. Don't give them any more straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. Now, Pharaoh's totally upset now. Things have changed here. And so now Pharaoh is in a place where Moses is shocked. Pharaoh's angry. And Moses probably doesn't know what's going on here yet. This is maybe not done in his presence because the same day as Moses is like, get back to work, right? They've already told Moses, get back. Matter of fact, Moses doesn't have a crib there. He doesn't have a house. Well, I have one in Midian and I have one here, in Goshen. No, Moses has to get back to work. Moses is the one who's going back. They're saying, get back to your labor. Wait a minute. I remember who you are. You're just a slave. I don't know who you thought you were, but you are just a slave too. Get back to your work. So he now sends an order to the overseers, right? He goes back to them and says, listen, I want to make sure, takes a special interest in these slaves. How amazing that Pharaoh is taking an interest in the slaves. And he's so angry that the retribution, this is something that he could have just rolled off his back. This is crazy. I can't even believe I listen to these guys. Get back to work. I'm done with that. No, he takes a special interest in making sure that their work is harder. They are on his mind, but I'm sure having Pharaoh thinking of you like this is not something that the children of Israel wanted. And I can imagine as Moses goes out and he says, hey, listen, he didn't listen to me right then, but it doesn't mean it's over, guys. Now, listen, we've got some work to do. And now they get an order from the slave drivers. Hey, no more straw. I'm sure Moses, when he went in, he probably thought that we didn't get what we wanted, but we'll try again. I'm sure he didn't expect that the thing that I did seemed to make things worse. Listen, that's the attack of the enemy. He's after now their faith. He's after now their belief. If they look at Moses and say, wait a minute, did you make it worse? Pharaoh is using a time-tested method to get the people of God to deny God's messengers and to deny God himself. If things don't get better, will you still trust this God? He used hardness. He used unfairness. He used oppression. These are time tested to say, do you really want this God to be on your side? Is this really the God you want to side with? Listen, you guys are free. I'm not going to let you go, but you better make a choice. Now, it's me who's showing you power, or Moses and his God who are showing you the power they have. Listen, he's out here making straw and bricks with you, right? You guys didn't get let go. Now, you sure that you want to put your chips down with this guy? You sure this Yahweh, whoever he is, whatever Moses said his name was, I can't remember, whatever they call him, you sure that you want to call him a God? Because it doesn't seem like that's a God to me who would actually make your situation worse. This God couldn't get you out, but now he's kept you in, and now it's harder. You sure that you want to side with him? The enemy always seeks oppression. Oppression is one of the great tools that he uses when you decide to do God's will. When God, I mean, listen, this thing is not there. The problem, there's the lacking of straw is not there until Moses now comes in. The moment the will of God is exposed, and the enemy is aware of it, because Pharaoh takes a special interest in making their life miserable. That means that you're on the enemy's radar in a way that is not like anybody else in the world. Pharaoh now commands them, gather your own materials for making straw. I'm trying to teach you a lesson. Do not ask me for another day off. And the fact that you even dare request some kind of concession from me shows me that you are losing respect for me. So the only thing I can do now to let you know is that I'm going to make your punishment even harder. I'm going to give you a heavier yoke. And so when you look at the straw has an acidic quality, and it's really, really great in making bricks because it's a binding agent. And not only does it bind the bricks, the clay, bind with the straw, but it also now, as the straw begins to decay and break down, one of the things that happens with that straw is that the acid that's in the straw makes the bricks more pliable, makes them much more sturdy so that they don't break as easy. So without straw, what you have is that these bricks will break really, really easy. They become really, really brittle. So you've got a situation here where the children of Israel realize, okay, the problem is going to be there. But Pharaoh now puts in something else. He says, also, make sure you don't change the quota. I want you to make sure that they keep the same quota, but they have more work. I'm going to make it nearly impossible, because he says, because they're lazy. The reality is that the reason why they are even thinking about this is that they don't have enough to do. You got to give them enough to do. That's really the problem. I'm going to put this squarely on the lap of the people who are meant to whip him and beat him. That's their problem. They're idle, and you guys are not giving them enough work. I'm going to shift the buck now on you, which is now putting it down on the taskmasters who are right there, who have no dog in the fight. So that means that they're going to be harder, that the boots on the ground are going to be tougher. This is an administrative decision that's coming from Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's wise. He puts it in the hands of people who are with them every day, who have a special hatred and animus, and in some ways blames them. The reason why they're crying out is that they're lazy. Who's responsible for that but the overseers? Who's responsible for even allowing them to even think like this? That's you. I blame this on you. So listen, you don't want me getting on you, do you? You don't want to lose anything because of these people, do you? Listen, make them cry out. Listen, they want to cry? Let's give them something to cry about. Listen, when you look at the bricks, the fact that you take the straw out, it's going to make the bricks brittle. And if they've got to go gather straw, and then they've got to go make bricks without straw, and then take those bricks to and fro to the building site, man, how many bricks are going to be broken? How much harder is this work? And if the bricks are going to be broken and the work is now harder, look at what Pharaoh is doing. You made it nearly impossible to meet the quota. This is an impossible task. And when you look at this, they're almost guaranteed to suffer. I'm sure, laying out everything, they could calculate it and realize this is guaranteed suffering. We now have an impossible task. Should we have trusted God in the first place? Should we have trusted his messengers in the first place? This is designed, it looks like it's designed to teach them a lesson, but it's really an attack. Pharaoh's feeble and weak attack against God. Wow, I mixed those two words together. Weeble. It's a new word. But when you look at this was his pointed arrow at God. I'm going after God by killing the thought that his messengers have power. And if his messengers can't manifest power, that means their God can't protect them. If their messengers don't have power, that means that their God can't have power to save them. And if God can't protect them, God can't protect you. And if God can't protect you, he's not worthy of your worship. If God can't remove the yoke I placed on you, then he's not worthy of your worship, your trust, or your praise. I want you to see your God for who he is. That's exactly what this was all about. Pharaoh moved here. Listen, these are slaves. They're nobody. They had no say before this. They have no say now. Why is the king of the known world? Why is Pharaoh, one of the greatest empires of all time, who's leading one of the greatest empires that have ever been known in the world, why is he concerned about the workload of a bunch of slaves? Something's happening and they don't know it. Listen, God will bring you. Something was happening with Job. Have you tried my servant Job? God was saying something about Job. Even though the suffering got worse, what Job didn't realize that God was claiming him as his servant, that God was saying, he's my servant. I'm using him in the midst of the trial. This is a God ordained trial. The bricks that were the straw that was taken out, this was not something that was by accident. This was also God doing something with the children of Israel. I need to get the taste of Egypt out of your mouth. Listen, there's some people that don't have to have some things made worse so that when the door shuts, they don't open it again. That God knows, listen, there's something in you that over years of slavery can get you addicted to the slave master and his food, can get you addicted to the slave master and his voice and his power and his perceived power. And so they've got to see Pharaoh for who he is. And so when you begin to look at this, this is intentional suffering. Now, Pharaoh calls it because it was the nerve of them to even think. And listen, that's what the enemy wants to do. I want to make sure, listen, I can't stop what God does, but I want to stop you from thinking about it. I want to stop you from hoping in it. You can't manifest in your life what you can't even imagine. And I want you to get that. The things that you can imagine, God is going to do exceeding and abundantly above anything we could ask or think, right? He's going to do that. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to imagine what God can do. That it's helpful for us to imagine God doing something awesome. The Bible tells us that Abraham, when he offered up Isaac, he offered him up willingly because he imagined Isaac being resurrected. Can you imagine that? That was not going to happen. He never needed that. But that's where his imagination was. God, I see you doing great things. I see, in spite of the fire that I'm in, you doing something awesome. I can imagine you bringing me out in some magnanimous way. This is where he was trying to kill. I want to kill your dreaming. I want to kill your imagination. I don't want you to think God can do it. I want you to wave the white flag. I want you to give up, abdicate your throne. Just because he said you're seated in heavenly places. If you were, you wouldn't be going through this. You wouldn't be broke like this. He wouldn't have left you. She would have said that. Whatever those things are, you can't be sitting there. So he wants you to abdicate your throne. He wants you to get up from the seat that God has said you're seated there right now. He wants you to give up the hope that God says this is your living, lively hope. He wants you to give up and throw it in the towel right now because it's logical, because it makes sense, because all you can see is what Pharaoh said. But can you remember what God said? Can you see what God said? Can you imagine freedom? And so when you begin to look at this, Pharaoh was trying to let them know you're getting too big for your britches. That means you sit down. And listen, that's what he wants you to do. You start thinking, listen, your faith is getting you in trouble. Your faith is too big for you. I don't know what you're thinking. That's not faith. That's fantasy. That's never going to happen. Listen, whoever told you you could have that, don't believe it. Whoever told you you could be that, don't believe it. That's what Pharaoh is going after, the belief. And if he's going after your belief, do you know how powerful it must be? If the king of Egypt is going after your hope, do you know how powerful your hope must be? That with all the things that he said, they're trifling things. Get those away from me. That's not big enough for me. This he's handling himself. I've got to crush them myself. I've got to take their faith away myself. I've got to make sure that they think that what they did wasn't faith, but was arrogance. He's trying to redefine who you are trying to redefine who they are. So Pharaoh says, listen, if you got enough time to make these kind of stupid requests to me, if you got enough time to get yourself in trouble like this, listen, we're going to give you something to do. I'm going to give you, you got this kind of idle time, I'm going to give you some work to do. But Pharaoh said, listen, I get it. They're lazy. That's the thing. The Israelites are crying out to me because they're lazy. And soon they're going to have something really to cry out for. Listen, the only reason why you're thinking like this is because you don't have enough work to do. You don't recognize the power that's in the world. You listen, and God says, greater is he that is in you now than he that's in the world. And we can lose sight of that. And now this is God allowing the raging sea to roar because the disciples needed it. They were in a boat. And they had seen, they were in a storm they had never been in before. You know, as fishermen, they had seen storms on Galilee before, but this one was different. And they were certain that they were going to perish. And this was the moment where they said, Lord, do you even care that we perish? I mean, does it even matter to you that we're suffering? We're in here in this boat with you, and here you are sleeping on the boat. And Jesus says, oh, you of little faith. You guys have no faith at all. And then he speaks to the storm, and the storm is quiet. They needed that storm. They needed that. They had to allow the Lord to conjure up this storm, to allow a storm to come on that sea that looked like it was going to kill them. They needed that because they needed to know something about God. He has the power to quell the storm. When Jesus at his word, the storm obeyed him. They were going to be in storms in their lives that were going to look like they were going to die. This was a moment they could remember. I've been here before. I've been on the edge and I thought he didn't care. I remember now he cares for me. Storms don't stop him. I remember now that near-death experiences are just that. They're near death, but they don't kill me. I remember now that he has the power to just speak a word and things in my life can change. God knew. There's some storms you're going through right now that are going to be milestones and memory stones for you. These will be touchstones that when you get to your weakest, you'll touch on those. You'll remember, I've been here before. I said these same things. I moaned and groaned and was sure I was alone and left by myself. And all of the work that I'd done was for naught. No, I remember now he spoke. And in the midst of this was a controlled burn. I was never going to die. This was a controlled storm. Yet my boat rocked around, but it didn't capsize. What am I doing? Imagining death when I should be imagining life. What am I doing imagining going down when I should be imagining living through the storm? Why am I imagining drowning instead of seeing myself swimming? Why am I seeing myself dead when I should see myself surviving? This is where they needed this. So Pharaoh says, I'm going to do something I mean for your evil. And Joseph said, remember, what the enemy means for evil, God, you mean it for good. This is going to be for their good. So verse 9 says this, make the work harder for the people so that they keep, watch this, they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Pharaoh said something there. He hears something here that is shaking him to his core. And so he says, I'm going to punish all the Israelites because they had the nerve to put forth leaders to come to me and talk to me and ask me for a holiday. I see they're organizing. I see that they start believing. The nation start believing. He punishes the whole nation. And this isn't just by accident. He sees that there's a national movement happening. He realizes this is not just a couple crackpots that are going forth. There's something brewing in the nation. These people who are people within a people, who are a nation within a nation, are beginning to come to themselves. He recognizes that, first of all, they're growing. That I can see that the fabric of Egypt is changing, and he was afraid. It doesn't look like the Egypt that I grew up with. He was afraid of this, and these people are starting to populate. And guess what? God had no intention of them taking over Egypt. Egypt was just afraid of it. God would say, no, I'm preparing another land for them. You just have to let them go. But now they begin to see that they are starting to think something about themselves because they put forth leaders. I mean, wait a minute. Why did you even let these guys? Did they talk to you first? You guys knew this, and you are starting to think this way about yourself. The enemy hates when you start thinking about yourself the way God wants you to see yourself. This was not about them being uppity. This is not about them having a greater self-confidence. They heard from Moses and Aaron that God had, had spoken to them. God had heard their cry. They begin to bristle up and their shoulders start going back and they start thinking about themselves differently. They were shaking off the yoke of slavery. They were shaking off the thoughts that, like, Pharaoh is the one who identifies me. And they realize we have an identity. We are a people. We are not just a bunch of slaves. And our God is calling for our freedom. We're starting to believe this thing now. And Pharaoh is going after that belief. He wants to quell that belief. And what's so interesting here is that Egypt had festivals for their God and other gods. And yet they were saying, no, not you. Egypt was a place, and in most of antiquity, allowed for the belief in multiple gods. This was not like it is today. It wasn't illegal. People had their gods. And, people would have conversations about your God and my God. Where your gods stay? Oh, those are the old gods. These are the new gods. These are the gods of over there. These are the Greek gods. So they knew that they're the gods of the sea and the gods of those people. And they accepted this. But somehow, when you heard this God, Yahweh, Jehovah, they could not accept his name at all. At the name of Yahweh, at the name of God, you understand that demons tremble when they hear the name that is above every name. The Bible tells that at the name of Jesus, that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. Pharaoh now felt the compelling bow in him, and he hated it. He felt, why did I take the meeting? Something made me bow to the needs of these people. Something made me bow to the request to even hear it. He felt it, and this was foreign to him. There was a pulling down. Get down before me. And he saw it. God didn't give him the whole shebang, but he felt a little bit of it, and he couldn't understand it. And when you begin to look at the prejudice here, that why you let everybody else? Why is everybody else getting festivals and celebrating their gods? Why are you allowing this in this kind of polytheistic world? That somehow this was something they could not bear because he heard this name. And he didn't know, even in his flesh, why he was railing against his name, but it did something to him. He heard this name. If Moses said, "Let my people go," this would have shaken him, and he would have probably beat Moses to death. But he said, our God, I'll tell you who he is. Our God, Yahweh, has spoken to us. He's come to us, and he told us that these are his people. And he says that those people must go and worship him for 3 days in this mountain. And Pharaoh is probably not sure what's going on inside of him, but something inside of him says, I've got to oppose it. But I had to hear it. And it's opposing the spirit that's on the inside of me. So Pharaoh assumes, first of all, okay, I accept the God, but he must be weak. Because if he was so powerful, he would have these people gone. These people would have left. These enslaved Hebrews would be free. He wanted them to think that. Pharaoh wanted the children of Israel to think this about their God. Listen, this is not a new attack. When the world begins to get hold of the book, the world is trying its best right now to reshape the view of Jesus, to reshape it so that we see him as weak and powerless. If he was all that, why are you so poor? If he was all that, why aren't your dreams coming true? If it was all that, why are they having it and not you? If God was so good, how could they come in your church and shoot those people? If he was so powerful, then why in the world did they subject fire and flame? Why were your people subjected to that? Oh yeah, I know. You wrote about how the Christians were killed over here, and they did this in South Sudan, and they did it. Al Qaeda is killing them over here, and they're doing this at El Shabaab, and they're killing Christians even in Somalia. So, if your God was so powerful, Why is all that happening? When they prayed in Rwanda, didn't they still get chopped up? Where was God then? He wants you to see God is weak. He's trying his best to connect us to people who are falling. Oh, now we'll talk about Christianity when we see this person who has done this, when we see this pedophile. That's what we want to connect Christianity to. You bunch of liars, you thieves. Look, he's doing that in the church. And can you believe even in the church, the pastor did this? Oh, behind the scenes, he got caught with this. How can your God be so powerful and he can't even keep his preachers in line? That's what he wants people to think. That's the message that he wants to give. Pharaoh was after their hope. That same enemy is after our hope now. Is God still there? How dare they hope in some God other than me? How dare they hope in something other than their paycheck, other than their government? How dare they hope in spite of what they see? This is the challenge that is there today. There's some things that are happening right now that are making things harder, and we're feeling it. And the whole thing is going after one thing, your hope. I want to go after your faith. Maybe you need to do a couple other things to make ends meet. Maybe you need to go out and color outside the lines to make things happen. God ain't gonna hear you. That's what he's trying to get you to believe. But I want you to see, God has a ram in the bush. You're not the ram in the bush. Don't forget what happened to the ram. So you're not the ram in the bush, but God's got a ram in the bush. God has got the answers that you need. We have to keep understanding the hope, because I can promise you this, we saw the end of the book. They come out. The end of the book is God's not done. God is going to show himself mighty here. God is saying, me first. The battle is not yours, but the victory is. Pharaoh's pointing his arrows at God. Though people suffer, this is not about them. He's now trying to get them to side with him against God. Come on over to me. I want you to be a complainer. I want you to be a murmurer. I want you to be faithless. You can continue to go to church if you want to, but I want you to scoff at it in your soul, in your spirit. I want you to say, that's probably not going to happen, but it's better than nothing. No, I want you to be a believer. That's what God is calling for. Don't forget the end of the story. It ends better for the children of Israel than it does for Pharaoh. Do not side with Pharaoh. Keep your hope. Fight for your faith. Defend it with the word of God. Listen, I'm glad that you were here tonight, and I hope that this was a blessing to you. Listen, continue to come on, because we're going to continue to break this down. God is speaking to his people right now, even through these lessons, through this Bible study. God is telling us what's going on and why we're being squeezed, but where we're supposed to be, because we know the end of the story. Liberation is there. We will be a nation. We are a nation now within a nation. The kingdom is not made of this world, but that we serve a God who is the King of Kings. Keep your hope. Listen, I appreciate you. I appreciate your support. Continue to share. Continue to be blessed and be empowered. God bless you. Have an awesome rest of your Thursday.